Hello and welcome to the Crypto Science Society podcast, a show dedicated to the study of strange and unusual phenomena and bringing you inside our investigations with us. My name is Jason Cordova, one of your hosts, and I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing our folklorist and special operations agent, Savannah Rivka, who recently did a field expedition to Hokkaido, Japan, where she was able to get an inside scoop on all of the inner workings of the Japanese relationship to ghosts, spirits, monsters, haunted dolls, and the like. So this was such an awesome interview, and we had so much material we had to break it into two parts. So I hope you, if you haven't gotten a chance to review part one, pause it, take a step back, and go ahead and listen to part one. And when you're ready, sit back, get some popcorn, relax, and enjoy part two of our field report from Japan. The idea of with the dolls having a spirit, that reminds me of the Ainu belief that we learned about with pretty much, isn't it, every object, every tool has a spirit.
Yeah, so this was something I did come across in my research because one thing that happened when I started learning a bit more about traditional Ainu music, which I feel like I have to say I'm only scratching the surface. Like I really wish I could pay them the respect that this tradition deserves, because it's really beautiful, amazing.
Right. And really quick for the listeners, the Ainu are indigenous
people who live they originate in the region of northern Japan, which is the Hokkaido area. Mm-hmm. They also originated in parts of Honshu, which is the largest island that makes up Japan, a little bit further south, and they were in parts of Russia, the island or the area that is now known as Sakhalin. And they were living on many of the other smaller islands surrounding. They were pretty spread out. Now, Ainu people certainly live throughout Japan, but a lot of the communities are very active in Hokkaido.
Yeah, and they are culturally distinct from the Wajin Japanese.
Yeah, and Wajin Japanese are kind of like the mainstream Japanese, that are descendant from the Jomon people, which have like a very long and ancient tradition. And the Ainu also have a very long tradition in the region as well. There is a third group that I feel I should mention from the south, and those are the Ryukyu people living in the area that is now known as Okinawa, but those islands were Ryukyu. And these are all very distinct traditions. The thing about Japan is it is a very diverse place with many different traditions. And these are even different languages. Like Ainu language is very different from Japanese language. Mm-hmm. And Ryukyu is also distinct, completely different spiritual tradition, culturally pretty different, and they have their own language as well.
Yes. So with the Ainu, you had some connections with Ainu people, and you did some research and study around them and their traditions.
Right. And again, this is thanks to like all the gracious people that I met out there, and the folks I met at Hokkaido University who really helped me out. But I was very excited to learn about stringed instruments, as I myself play stringed instruments. And the Ainu have a really a beautiful stringed instrument called a tonkori. And a tonkori is a small wooden instrument. I'm having trouble remembering exactly how many strings it has on it right now. I will not give you a number without knowing. I'll figure that out. But it's really beautiful. The strings are plucked open. They're the open strings. It looks like there's 5 strings on it typically, and it's held it's usually held against the side. And I can tell you a little folk story that I was told, I heard in the Ainu community as to why it's held on the side like that. And that is that first it began by, the person began by saying the tunkori is a woman's instrument because the story goes that there was an Ainu woman who had a baby and her baby died, and she was very sad. She was very upset about this, and I think probably her partner was also very sad about this, and so her partner decided to take a tree and carve a tonkori, this instrument, and to give to her, and this sounded like a way that this couple who had lost their baby was dealing with their grief. And so he gave this gift to his wife, and she took it and held it the way you hold a baby. But when her husband made this gift for her, he put something inside. So a tonkori, being a stringed instrument made of wood, is hollowed out inside. So he put something inside. The instruments that I saw had like a marble glass bead or something like this, and it makes like a sound. It rattles around in there, and they said that's the soul. That's the soul of the baby, right? That's the soul of the tonkori. And even the part of the tonkori where the strings are connected, it looks like a face, like the person who was telling me the story was holding the tonkori and showing me, like, you see how you hold it like this. This is how it is like a baby. And so that was very interesting. And then I really wanted to learn more. I found out that the tonkori originated in the area that is now known as Sakhalin. So it's now Russian territory. So these were the Ainu living very far north. And they were interacting with other indigenous communities in that area, Sakhalin. There are a couple of other indigenous groups up there, and also Russian communities. And so they developed the tonkori. There was another instrument that I have read that Ainu had developed, another stringed instrument that was similar to a balalaika, but I have only ever seen descriptions by researchers, ethnomusicologists, because I don't think any of these instruments survived. Unfortunately, Hokkaido was very recently colonized, and this history is very fresh, and a lot of things were destroyed. That is a very, very sad reality of the situation. But I did want to tell another folk tale that had to do with what you brought up, the belief in Ainu tradition that everything has a spirit, everything. Yeah. Now, we're not just talking about trees and the animals and the plants and the rocks and the earth. We're also talking about things that many people would regard as inanimate objects, right? Now, there's a lot of diversity within Ainu communities and in different regions. Some Ainu would travel seasonally for certain things, or they might move. And if they moved, some of them had this belief that you had to destroy anything that got left behind. Now, the reason for this was the belief that everything has a spirit or a soul. Because if you need to destroy it so that you can free the spirit or free the soul, send the soul to the spirit realm.
And I imagine there's a ceremonial way to destroy it.
Yes, or a ritual way to do this. Because if you leave it behind, the spirit of that item will be trapped there, and the item is no longer being used in the way that it was intended. So this is a big problem. So the story about the tonkori is very interesting. It was that there were 2 tonkori that got left behind by some Ainu that had moved. And because these tonkori were left behind, their spirits became restless. And the tonkori became possessed like demons, right?
Yeah.
And they were upset. So they came after the people. They came after the Ainu people. But there was one Ainu man who had a vision or a dream, and in this dream, a protector spirit or a deity warned him about these possessed tonkori that were coming for them, that were going to come for his community. And this deity told him in this vision, in this dream, he said that what he needed to do to protect the people was they all had to tell the tonkori were going to come, and they would say, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" And they had to respond, "We are children of the tonkori." And this would kind of placate them, right? So he awoke from this vision or this dream, and he went and told the people what he had heard, that what they needed to do. And so these two tonkori came, these possessed tonkori. They were vicious and aggressive, and they demanded, they said, "Who are you? Who are you people?" And they said, "We are the children of the tonkori." And the two tonkori, upon hearing that, were kind of pacified. And in that moment when they were pacified, the people were able to take the tonkori and do this ritual sending, which means that the tonkori were broken or destroyed in some way, and these spirits were released.
Wow.
Yeah, and so as a folklorist who's studying music, I just absolutely love this story. Yeah.
Yeah. And as somebody with, ties to indigenous traditions, I love the fact like there's these similarities with kind of some perspective, and it's relatable. I feel like these stories are very relatable to me. And they have a lot of it's very much alive, their folk traditions.
Just to bring up something that I came across in my research that I really was interested in these communities was the recitation of what are called yukar. And the yukar are Ainu epics. So these are the stories of the spirits and the deities. And
is that what we observed in the hut?
Yes, so we went to Biratori, which is an Ainu community, Biratori, Nibutani, that region, which is in Hokkaido. We went there for the Ainu Music Live, which is it's a day-long event with, it's really more for the Ainu community, but because the work I was doing and the people I knew, I heard about it, and I really wanted to go because I want to hear the music that folks are working on. And it was really, what was really great about it is that all the kinds of music that people were working on in this community, and so whatever they were into, so there was the very traditional, like the yukar, which I will talk a bit more about in a minute, and there were traditional Ainu dances and songs, and then there was cheerleaders, and like breakdancing, and some kind
remix.
Remix,
some like hip hop stuff,
and then there was the really awesome Ainu rock band, the Ainu Art Project that we saw at the end, which really, really fantastic group.
Blew our socks off.
Yeah, of course. Like I've seen them a couple times. Every time they're really great, and they're very involved, very active group, very involved, all over the place. Yeah.
Indigenous rock.
Yeah, we should talk more about them in a minute, but I have to talk a bit about the Yukar. So the Yukar, that's an interesting one. So as I said, these are the stories of the spirits and deities. Yeah, we did get to see it. It happened in a reconstructed. They had a small section of the Ainu Museum in that area in Biratori, And out in front, there were like traditional houses. It was like an open air museum, and we were in one of these traditional houses with the fire pit, and it was still like they had coals in there. It was warm. It was it was actually very cozy because I remember it was a cold, rainy day, and we went in there, and they told us we had to sit based on gender. So women had to sit in one place, and men had to sit in a different place. And there were two people who were reciting Yukar, and one was a younger woman who I know is a member of an all-women's Ainu music group called Marubru, which means butterfly. And that they're really active. They're a really cool group. And then there was an Ainu elder, an older woman, who was also reciting Yukar. And they were doing, as I understand it, they were doing it in a way that is very traditional, which is they had a stick that they were tapping in a rhythm, and they were reciting it. And it has, the voice does very interesting rhythmic things, but these are telling the stories. And in this story, if someone does a Yukar, you're telling this story as if you are that spirit. So if you are telling, like, for example, the owl is important, the bear is important in Ainu spirituality. So if you're telling the story of one of these deities or spirits, you are telling it as if you are that spirit. Like, I am the bear, and I do this, and I go on this journey, and I go in this way, and this is my story. And so, and they are in the Ainu language, and so it's not a song. It would not be accurate to call that a song. It is an epic.
Recitation.
Yeah, a recitation, but to me, as someone who studies music, it musically, just to hear what people are doing with their voices, it is really amazing. And I've heard Yukar recited a couple of times, and what I'd heard is that there were many different ways that Yukar used to be recited, but again, because of the way that these traditions have been disrupted because of colonization, which is still in an active process.
Right.
Like, there are places we can say are post-colonial because the colonial powers have pulled out, and these nations have been able to declare independence and have their sovereignty, their autonomy. But there are places that are still actively being colonized, such as the United States and Japan. These are not post-colonial places. We need to acknowledge that. So, but the point here is the Yukar, a lot of the different types of Yukar have been lost. And so there are not as many styles or traditions that are known. And so what's happening is people are, one thing that I heard is that often when people go to do Yukar, they want to be very traditional. So they only practice what they know from that has been preserved. There's one person that I know who is a member, or the leader, I should say, of the band Ainu Art Project, Yuki Koji. I have seen him perform Yukar, and he has a bit of a different style. He is definitely a storyteller. He's a singer. He's a performer, and he'll do the traditional style of Yukar, but he also is doing some different interpretations. And the reason he's doing this is because this is a living tradition. These communities are still alive. They're not frozen in time. Yeah. And so, like, this is how, traditions do evolve, communities evolve, cultures evolve. And so this is very important. And that's, I think that's a very powerful way that he is engaging with the traditions and with the Ainu communities. But Yuki Koji travels a lot, because I saw him perform in Sapporo, in Biratori, and then I went to Rebun Island and for indigenous anthropology and archaeology course, and then he was there. But I also found out he's performed all over the world with Ainu Art Project. He's performed at the Louvre in France, which is really cool. But again, I think what he's doing is great, but this is one individual, and he doesn't represent all of the Ainu people, but I think his work is very interesting.
Right. And what I think it does is it draws attention to relevance of contemporary indigeneity, right? And
Yeah.
it's not just stagnant. There's a term of like this just this stagnant historical,
Being like static or frozen in time.
yeah, this static historical native person where they you know we are here, we do exist, contemporary life we are, and there are evolutions, and there are ways to bring those traditions, they're evolving, you know, and there are ways to preserve the the traditional way as well, and it's you can have both, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, we saw that with Ainu Art Project because, like I said, it's a rock band, and they had
Yeah,
like some pretty heavy metal guitar
yeah,
riffs going
yeah,
on
yeah,
at the same time that there was like a beautiful tonkori that somebody was plucking and
yep,
playing, and you know that
yep.
was
And even
great.
at that specific event we observed the traditional recitation, and then the contemporary, just the community, music, right? The celebration of the community through their music and whatever they're into.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So and if I can be a total nerd for a second, because
Mhm.
we're talking about UCAR,
Yeah.
um, and I feel like I don't want to go without mentioning this. I had to look up this person's name again, but um, I did say many Yukar were lost, but there were a number of Ainu people who worked very hard to document Yukar. So like Ainu people, it's a very rich culture. It's an oral tradition. It's an oral culture. So they didn't have written language. This is just this is just how they did things, and
Mhm.
there was a young Ainu woman in born in 1903, and she was a very interesting person. She was multilingual. She learned a number of different languages, and she became very involved with the church, even though she was Ainu. And
A Christian church.
yeah, yeah. So like the
Okay.
mission became very important to her and her auntie. Like it was like kind of central to their story and their lives. And what's
Mhm.
very interesting is they were practicing both being Ainu and kind of being involved with the church, like the Christian church, at the same time. And it really made me think a lot about some of our friends we have in the Native American community. I mean,
Right. So they're
Christianization
like,
happens,
yeah.
and people and communities are going to change, and so people will adopt different traditions
Right.
and rework them to be like what they need them to be.
Hmm.
Well, like this individual, Yukie Chiri, is an example of this because she was both Ainu and Christian. Like it seems like that they were both important to her and her auntie and possibly other family members. But what she did, as I said, she was bilingual. She ended up collecting, transcribing, and translating a large collection of Yukar. And she did this as a very young person. I mean, like as a teenager and in her early 20s, because unfortunately, Yukie Chiri ended up passing away when she was only about like 18 or 20 years old because she had a heart condition. But I just like to name her because I think what she did is absolutely amazing. And we were talking about Nobori Betsu earlier, where we
Hmm.
went and saw this hot springs and the Oni, and that's actually where she was from. And there what that's an Ainu. There's an
Yeah.
Ainu community there. There's a museum there to honor her.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that back around too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I just there's a book written about her life and her work and all these Yukar that she documented and translated, and it's just absolutely amazing. I mean, like I find this person so inspiring. Like
Hmm.
just. It's amazing that she did so much work at such a young age.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's powerful. Maybe we can add that to the official club reading list. Good book club. Yeah, without kind of derailing things too much, you mentioned Raeboon Island, and I did want to talk about some things on Raeboon Island before we run out of time.
Oh, I had one other thing too, though.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go for it.
Oh, the other thing, actually, it connects to some things we were talking about earlier, because we had
Sure.
talked about various trends that are happening in Japanese society, like very real things,
Okay.
that also have kind of a spiritual element to them, or interesting ways that it ties in culturally. So a trend that I recently learned about that happens in Japan, in Japanese, the term is johatsu. This it has been referred to in English as evaporated people,
Mm-hmm.
because these are people who absolutely disappear. Even in modern day society today, they absolutely disappear. And this is I mean, it's kind of mind boggling to me. So, this term johatsu, according to a Japanese sociologist who's been studying it, said that it kind of started cropping up more and more in the 1970s, and that the concept was kind of connected to an idea of freedom. And it's hard to say why people might disappear. But the spiritual element of this is that this became so common, like, and I mean, like, you just wake up one day and you're like, the story would go like, your husband says, all right, I'm gonna go to work, and takes his briefcase like he always does and walks out, and then you just never see him again, and you call his work and he's like, oh, I don't know, we didn't see him, right? And that's just it. And like these kinds of things, or like, it happened so much that there was like kind of a spiritual element called kamikakushi. This is connected to spirited away. So that's the belief that the gods or the spirits hide people or take them,
Yeah.
right? So if you've seen the film Spirited Away, which is a beautiful, beautiful film,
Which, if you
uh,
haven't,
you
it's time.
it's time to see it. Yeah. So this actually is I first watched that film in a Japanese class I took during my bachelor's degree about the culture, because it is a good film to kind of give you an idea that, like, in Japan, they believe that there's thousands of spirits around you, all the time. And in the beginning of this film, it is an anime. There is a child riding in a car with her parents, and they stop the car, and they all get out of the car, and they're kind of walking around, and the little girl kind of wanders off, and she kind of goes under and around some trees, and I don't know, and she crosses some kind of threshold, clearly, and she leaves the realm of the humans and enters into the realm of the spirits, the deities, and the gods.
Mm.
And one of them like steals her name, and she can't leave. She's stuck there, and that's the whole story, which is a very fun, colorful story. But this is connected to a very real trend that's happening in Japanese society of people disappearing, and this was something that they came up with to like. But it's interesting, is this, are people wandering, if like there was one story about a hiker who wandered off into the forest
Yeah.
and nobody ever saw him again, and they said that's johatsu, this is an evaporated person. And it's like, well, we have a lot of stories, like there's beliefs about fairies and elves
Yeah.
that lead somebody astray and
Right.
then take them into the fairy realm, and or mess with the sense of time, right?
Right. Or even replace them. Right. Like
Right,
there's.
right. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that was,
Right.
this is the Japanese concept of that. Uh,
Right. Now, you mentioned, so this is a like this belief that people are taken by the spirits, just taken into the spirit realm and never seen again. Like this is an old belief, correct?
I'm not sure how old this belief is. Like I said, this term johatsu. was starting to come into use more in the 1970s.
Right.
But I do think this concept, like spirited away,
Mm-hmm.
taken away by the spirits, kamikakushi, I think has been around at least as long as the johatsu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I'd be interested because there's also parallels into, there's like disappearance cases of folks throughout the world. Even there's the missing 411 kind of stuff, and the national parks and national forests where people are known to just vanish without a trace. And there's researchers who have dug into that and found that there's some enough cases to raise this question of like, well, what? A lot of people it can be explained by more normal or more conventional means, but there's definitely enough of cases where there's just no evidence. Like people just went without a trace. You had mentioned a situation where somebody seemed like they were running away.
Yeah, sometimes Johatsu is framed in that way. Like sometimes people do run away, and they did talk about Johatsu cases where it's like women fleeing domestic violence.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I said, this is also a societal issue. There could be very good reasons
There's a
that
lot of
people,
repression.
well, right,
Right.
or
There
other
was
issues.
there's
But
a very yeah. Go ahead.
in this story, yeah, the guy left his home. He was like in his early 20s, and he said, I'm going to work, see you later." And then he didn't come home that night, and his family called his work, and they said, no, he quit. He quit his job. And they had no idea where he went. And then suddenly, eventually, a couple of days later, the authorities said they had discovered his belongings on a ferry that was bound for an island in southern Japan. And they had no evidence of this man. They don't know what happened. He had a small bag with like belongings, and it looked like he was planning to start his life somewhere else. So it was definitely very strange. Like they were concerned like maybe this was a case that this man took his own life, and they did search and they didn't find any evidence of that. But like the family, based on what they knew of him, said they thought that was unlikely. But also like the way they found his belongings looked like somebody who was preparing for a trip and preparing to, like as I said, start a life somewhere else. So it was odd, and that's an unsolved case. Like this is one of these johatsu, they don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really interesting. Really interesting. I would be fascinated to look a little more into it and see if folks who investigate these cases.
Yeah, there are detective agencies. The
Mm-hmm.
police don't always take up these cases because they do believe that it is the individual's right. This is their expression of freedom, that if they want to leave
Or
and
right
not
to
talk to their
disappear.
family, yeah, they have the right to do that. And that is also very interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, it's intense, you know.
Yeah.
So,
So maybe not necessarily vanishing without a trace, but there's a bit of a getaway. Raeboon Island
right,
is
right. Going back to Raeboon Island.
kind of a little different than the hustle and bustle of mainland Japan.
Very, very different. Well, first of all, Hokkaido is different from the rest of Japan.
Yes,
It's
it
in
is.
itself. It's completely different in and of itself. But I could just talk about that forever. So let's maybe focus on Raeboon. So Raeboon
Yep.
is a very small island, very small one on the northern coast of Hokkaido, and it's fairly close to Sakhalin, which is an island that is now Russian territory. And they claim that on a very clear day, that from the very tip of the cape of the most northern cape of Raeboon Island, that you can see Sakhalin, although I have never met anyone who has been able to see it. But the point is that it's close. It's a very close to Russian territory. It's a
Go over
very
there throwing rocks at it.
how I hope not. We don't need
Provoke.
let's not do that. Right. But it's a very interesting place. There are like small villages, mostly fishing communities living there. And absolutely, there Ainu people used to live there, although there's no people who are openly connected with Ainu communities living there today. And now I say it like that because it's very difficult for some people to come out as Ainu.
Yeah.
There's so much negativity around the identity and the experience of being Ainu. It is so aggressively stigmatized that there might be people who are of Ainu descent who don't know about it because of the way the descent lines have been disrupted, because of internalized oppression, internalized racism. And so that's why I say it like that. There are not any known people who are living on Rangoon Island who are openly living as Ainu.
Sure.
But there definitely were Ainu people living there. But it's interesting because it's very different. It's a smaller island. There's smaller communities, and mostly, as I said, lifestyle would have been based on fishing. Like there are bears throughout Hokkaido, but there are no bears on Rangoon Island. It's a very different kind of completely different climate. It's kind of alpine. There's a lot of flowers, and so that was very interesting. And I went there to participate in what was described as an indigenous anthropology and archaeology course.
Yeah.
And I expected it to have something to do with Ainu traditions, and it really had very little to do with Ainu traditions, although Yuki Koji, who is the leader of Ainu Art Project, did visit for a while I was there, and I was fortunate enough to get to speak with him, which was very nice. This is one of the thing about Rangoon Island. This is one of the most intense cases of like rural isolationism. There is no airport on this island. I mean, there's an abandoned airport that is very small and kind of creepy. But I mean, so if anything needs to get there, it has to go by ferry. So if the weather is bad, like right now, there's a typhoon. There has been this typhoon that hit Japan and has caused a lot of damage, and people have lost lives and are struggling down there, which
very, very sad, and hearts go out to everybody out there.
So like it's very isolated on Rangoon Island, and that's definitely a challenge. And so there's a lot of empty houses. We were running our base of operations for the archaeological element of this course out of an abandoned elementary school that had shut. So like there's very little. There's just not a whole lot of infrastructure there because there's not a whole lot of people living there. I mean, it's kind of just a lot. It feels like a lot of wilderness and a couple of houses, a couple of. There's people living there. There's some people living there.
So you're on this remote island in northern Japan,
surrounded by sea lions.
Surrounded by sea lions, working on the scientific expedition, working out of an abandoned school, while a hurricane.
No, a typhoon. A typhoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was
quite the experience, and I was curious because this was presented as something that was going to be like an indigenous archaeology course.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in archaeology, but I've never really dipped my toe in it because of a lot of like moral issues that I feel like I have with archaeology. So I thought this would be a good chance for me to try to engage with this, and I had the impression it would be presented in a kind of a conscious way, and it was very challenging for me. I found myself. I mean, so the site we were digging on went all the way back to the Jomon period, which is like thousands of years. These are like the first settlers in Japan, so we're digging up like clay pieces and bone tools, things like this. And it goes all the way up through the modern period with continuous settlement in this area. And this includes Ainu. So there were Ainu things, and they had found, not at the specific site that I was working at, But in other sites, there are a lot of archaeological sites on this island, and they have found human remains, which I am absolutely like really not comfortable with. Like I'm a little bit uncomfortable digging up things that are other people's personal items. In the first place, I do not want to go near human remains.
You're not a
So
grave robber.
personally, this is my feeling. But
That's a personal line that you've drawn for yourself.
right. But I did actually go to the site, and I did talk to a lot of the people who were working there. And it was interesting. Yuki Koji came and he did an Ainu blessing on the site.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. And so that's one conscious thing. They I do know that the professor's working with some members of the Ainu community.
Yeah.
There was another indigenous lecturer who was there, a Native American archaeologist.
Really?
Yeah. So this isn't like a green light or for everything. It's not like, they had a couple of indigenous people, so it's all good. But I'm saying there is representation.
Sure.
But I came away from it just realizing archaeology is not for me. Like, I don't care if I'm just digging up somebody's an old spoon that they use just to eat some soup.
Yeah.
I don't know what the person who owned that spoon wanted with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe for some reason they didn't want anyone to ever see it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was very special to them and they were trying to hide it away. We don't know because that person is gone now.
Yeah.
And we can't ask. But I have a lot of mixed feelings because I'm very interested in history and I really like museums. And a lot of the things that we learn come from like what might get pulled out of the ground by an archaeologist. So this is when I was just like, no, I'm very comfortable being a folklorist. I'm happy with my role as like trying to work directly with communities and talk to people. And even that, like, is touchy. Like I want to do that in a conscious way and respect the people that I'm working with. And there are people who will always view someone like me as exploitive, no matter what. And I'm aware of that. And
I mean,
I definitely, I want to work carefully, and I'm drawn to this largely because of my own backgrounds and my own experiences as a person who feels underrepresented as a queer person, as a woman. Yeah.
Well, and I do think that it's good to have that representation in this work, right? Things are going to happen, and it's good to have a voice to help guide it in a positive way, if that's possible.
Yes, and outsiders and allies have important roles in activism and in research and in academia and in the communities, but that is not something that I can give myself permission to do. So like functioning as an ally is something that has to come.
Being an ally does not mean savior.
Right.
Being an ally.
Thank you, nice white lady.
Yeah. Thanks.
Was a nice white lady to come fix all our problems. Where have you been all along? Like, no, I'm not.
Right. This isn't Dangerous Minds, but this is the part of the story where Michael Crichton and Stephen King teamed up to write part of your life here, right? Because you had an interesting experience in the school or in your room where you were staying.
Right. So coming back to my stay in Raeboon Island, I was staying in a very beautiful hotel guest house. It was a traditional Japanese style hotel with tatami mats and the futon on the floor. It was a beautiful place, and the owners were very nice. It was run by a family, and it was right next to the ocean, so I could hear the ocean at night. It was like so relaxing and peaceful, and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to sleep so well. And the first few nights I did. And after I started spending time at the school, one of the nights I had either a dream or a vision or something that was very striking of a child who was having a very hard time. And the child did not seem to have like very proper clothes, like, and they seemed to be coming from a very long time ago, and I couldn't understand anything the child was saying. Like, this child was trying to speak to me, and I could not understand anything they were saying. I do know some Japanese. I know like a handful of words in Ainu, and that would be very specific Ainu dialect. There are many different Ainu dialects. I don't know what this kid was speaking. And I was so, like, it felt like something important was happening, like this child had something important to tell me, but I was so shaken and so uncomfortable by this experience that I forced myself to wake up. And I just remember I was like, nope.
Now, what I remember when you first told me this story, actually, we had been talking about this, maybe this, some of the issues around the collecting of artifacts and things like that. And
right, did I disturb a spirit when I was like on the site?
Right. That raised that question. But also, you had something about the window being open or the blinds.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, from what I remembered of the story, like when you first told it, it was this, you were like in this asleep and awake place, and you had this, we'll call it a vision or this impression of this child talking to you in a language that you didn't understand and seemed very, very distressed. You got up and closed the window or the blinds and went to sleep, and everything was fine.
Yeah. I mean, and what I reflected on was that we were working in this abandoned school, and the person I saw was a child. So I don't know if
Right.
it was somehow connected to that. The history of the island, which I did learn during my time there, is pretty, like I said, there's been continuous settlement for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
But they know in the more recent documented history, what was documented by the Japanese government, is that like this was very close to like during World War II, where there was a lot of conflict, and there was a lot of poverty, and there was a food shortage. Specifically, there was a food shortage on Raeboon Island to the point that they didn't know what to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these are fishing villages, but they specialize in certain kinds of fish, and uni, the sea urchin, which is like really delicious. I got to try it while I was there. But there was some kind of food shortage during difficult times, to the point that they were eating They were eating the dogs on the island.
So pretty.
It was rough. It was rough. Yeah. So, and it's interesting because now, I mean, it's fishing villages, and people might go there for vacation because it's, like I said, beautiful nature, beautiful beaches.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's just very striking too. This is what in my research, which has been largely in Europe, this is what they would call the emptying of the countryside, right? Mm-hmm. These rural areas where less and less people are able to continue living there because they can't find a way to survive economically. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like, that's what I think of when I reflect on whatever it was that I saw. Maybe I was processing my own feelings around being there, and being in this empty school and seeing so many empty houses, and also like abandoned military facilities. Can we talk about how freaking creepy that is? That is really creepy, because they're right. This is one of the closest parts of Japan to Russia, and Russia's looming there. So they have military facilities, military housing. Abandoned military housing is terrifying.
It is, yeah. Even occupied military housing can be kind of uncomfortable.
Sure. Yeah. But Raeboon Island is just absolutely beautiful during the day, and I found it a bit creepy at night. So.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like our audience to know? Anything?
You know, well, first and foremost, I'd just like to emphasize I don't feel that I'm an expert on these, but I have been, trying to research and learn and pay respect to these traditions and communities. And if you're interested, I encourage people to learn more. Folks are always welcome to contact me. And also think about I'm just thinking about what's going on in Japan right now with the typhoon, and I heard that there are more storms headed that way. And I have heard from some of my friends that there are some people, particularly in more underrepresented communities, that are really struggling right now, who have lost their houses and are unable to get support. So if anybody's interested in making donations, you can contact me, and I know I have the direct connection to make sure that the money goes to the people who need it the most.
Yeah, so would you rather, do you want us to have them contact the organization email and we can go that way, or we can maybe put links? We can put links in the notes.
Yeah, I can send, I have the links. I can provide the link.
Yeah, so we can do that. And yeah, if anybody wants to contact Savvy with questions or any of us, email us at cryptosciencesocietyx@gmail.com. That's about the show. So thank you very much for listening. This show is sponsored by Turn a Page Bookshop. You can visit them at turnapagebookshop.com. Check out their selection of all kinds of books, not only paranormal and supernatural stuff. They've got just about everything that you might be looking for. The show is written and produced by Crypto Science Society and its members. Theme music is Dead Bats on a Wire by their very own Savannah Rivka and Ashley Eve. We are so happy to have this music as part of the show, and so grateful to Savannah and Ashley for donating their time and talent to make it happen. Graphic design is by Eddie Norrie and Heather Metcalf. Sound by Ace Cepeda. Check out our Patreon for exclusive content and good stuff. Keep us rolling and keep the good content coming. Let us know what you think in the comments and email your suggestions. Follow us on social media. Visit the website sciencecryptojournal@wordpress.com. Like, subscribe, share, and until next time, keep questioning.